Hello, and I hope you're having a good day. I am starving for a warm and hearty breakfast. We've had some really cold weather here, so I am going to make some pumpkin oatmeal. I have old-fashioned oats, some pumpkin, some spices, raisins. So I'm gonna make that and enjoy it, and it will keep me full for hours. The amount of fiber between the oats and this pumpkin, you're set from a fiber aspect for your day probably. All right, so I'm gonna jump right into it because, as I said, I am hungry. To make the oatmeal, I'm gonna start with the liquid ingredients and all of the spices. I'm gonna add the can of pumpkin puree. So for this, I am using cow's milk. The recipe is from the, I think Artie Sakura, I think is how you pronounce her name. It's been years. I actually do remember watching her on Food Network years and years and years ago. She does have you use almond milk. I don't buy almond milk. We don't use milk for a whole lot. And I don't mind using cow's milk for things. So I'm just going to go ahead and use cow's milk. I'm going to mix in that pumpkin. So this is just a whole can of pumpkin puree. Then we're going to put in, I'm not going to measure, 2 tablespoons of golden or regular raisins. Again, I'm eyeballing that one because I don't mind a little extra there. We have a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. I'm using Morton's kosher salt. If you're using Diamond Crystal, you might need to adjust. Morton's is a little bit saltier, so I use a little bit. I use what the recipe calls for, but you might need to use a little bit more, depending on how you like your oatmeal. All right, this is not in the recipe. I am going to add a little bit of nutmeg. That was not even 1/8 of a teaspoon. It's really just, I could have probably just used this and maybe 2 or so shakes. With that, we have a 1/4 teaspoon of cardamom. This is in the recipe. A 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. I'm just gonna pop that off. It's actually a lot of cloves. Okay. And then 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. I am going to go for a little bit of a heaping teaspoon, or 1/2 teaspoon, excuse me. So I'm just not gonna flush it off. So if you see it's just heaping a little bit, I love cinnamon. So like a little extra there. And so this whole mixture, I'm actually not really gonna bother stirring it until it heats up because a lot of those spices mix in better when it's heated. So I'm gonna pop this on the stove around medium. Once it comes to a boil, I will add 2 cups of the oatmeal. Because this has dairy in it, I'm going to disobey the rules a little bit and not allow it to come to a full boil. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the oats now. So that's 2 cups of oats. In the recipe, it calls for quick cooking oats, but not instant oats. Honestly, I don't even know what that is. And I'm not gonna buy special oats for this. So the only kind of oats we usually have in our house are old-fashioned, which is what I just added, and steel cut. For most oatmeal recipes, I actually prefer steel cut. I usually only use this for baked oatmeal and maybe in like cookies and things like that. But for this, with the pumpkin puree, I do actually like the texture of the old-fashioned oats over the steel cut oats. I feel like the steel cut oats don't quite mesh with the pumpkin, and you kind of have a weird combination of textures, at least for me personally. All right, so I just added this in. I'm just gonna cook it for a few minutes and then I will plate it up at the end. Here we have it. It is done. I will say, in my humble opinion, this does not look as good as it tastes. It definitely has like especially when it's cooking and it's like, I don't know, it makes this interesting, very thick sound. It has a very, warm brown look to it, but it tastes phenomenal. So I'm gonna go ahead and plate it up. Here we have the finished oatmeal. I'm just going to add, now the recipe calls for heavy cream. I don't use heavy cream a whole lot, and I'm not really willing to buy it just for one thing. So I'm just using the same milk that I put in, but I do like that little fresh hit of cream, especially since this is a heavier, creamier dish. I do like the lightness that brings. Adding a few more raisins. Chopped pecans, again, I think it calls for pumpkin seeds or pepitas. I forgot to cut these ahead of time. I do want to cut these, but I'm going to throw in a couple of tart cherries. This is actually my favorite. I probably didn't need to add the raisins because this is what I love in the finished oatmeal. That tang and that chew. I love it against this dish. And I am going to add a little bit. We get our maple syrup in a really large container and then we put it off into this, but it's at the point that we probably need to do something because that whole bottom is just maple syrup sugar crystals, but just doesn't need too much sweetener in my opinion. But here we have it, a beautiful bowl of pumpkin oatmeal. The other thing that I will warn you is if you don't consume large amounts of fiber, you might want to plan when you eat this around that. I won't go into it, but I think you can understand because this, with the added oatmeal on its own, but also with that pumpkin puree, you're getting a pretty big hit of dietary fiber, which is good for you, but also just, you know, maybe have to think about that when you're eating it. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and add the cherries and dig in. And thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day. Comment down below. I would love to hear what your favorite oatmeal combinations are.